A millionaire dressed as a poor man and went to a beauty pageant to meet his bride. But when he entered the venue, he bumped into a cleaning lady. Michael took a slow sip of his whiskey, the burn of the liquid contrasting with the warmth of the lively discussion around him. His friends, Oliver and Andrew, were in the midst of one of their typical debates, the topic this time being the elusive search for the right life partner. They were gathered in their favourite spot, a cosy restaurant with dim lighting, a crackling fireplace, and a familiarity that made it feel like a second home. Oliver, his expression a mix of bitterness and resignation, set his glass down with a thud. In the beginning, women can be so charming and attentive, he began, his voice laced with frustration. But as soon as they feel they've got your commitment, it's like a switch flips. Michael's brow furrowed slightly, but he kept his gaze fixed on his drink. Oliver's words carried the sting of recent heartbreak. His fiancée had called off their engagement only weeks ago, citing irreconcilable differences after Oliver insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Andrew, always the cynic and perpetually single, leaned forward. "He's not wrong," he chimed in, his tone tinged with exasperation. "It's like you have to choose between a stunning woman who's only after your bank account or a genuinely good-hearted one who doesn't fit society's beauty standards. Where's the middle ground?" The two exchanged knowing glances and laughs, their banter lightening the heavy undertone of their words. Michael, however, remained silent, his thoughts distant as he gazed out the window. The snow outside swirled gently under the streetlights, a quiet contrast to the conversation. His friends noticed his lack of participation, their chuckles fading as they exchanged a look. "Mike's just the kind who'll probably have a different take than us," Oliver said, a small teasing smile tugging at his lips. Michael's name seemed to snap him out of his thoughts. A flash of recognition crossed his face, but he didn't immediately respond. Oliver tilted his head and pushed further. "What's on your mind? Speak up, Michael." Feigning confusion, Michael turned to them. "What are you guys on about?" he asked, his tone light, though he knew full well where the conversation had gone. He sighed, realizing he couldn't dodge the topic much longer. Taking a measured breath, he leaned back in his chair. "I just don't get it. Why do you guys believe it's impossible for someone to be both beautiful and genuine without being materialistic? Maybe the problem isn't with women, it's with where you're looking or who you're attracting." Andrew smirked, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, listen to Romeo over here," he teased, earning a chuckle from Oliver. But Michael wasn't laughing. He leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "Why is it every time you guys talk about women, it's always in a negative light? Are you seriously saying that every attractive woman out there has some hidden agenda? Come on." His friends exchanged glances, their amusement faltering slightly. Michael's words carried weight, but Oliver was the first to recover, crossing his arms as he shot back. "Spoken like someone who's never been burned." Michael's jaw tightened, but he let the comment slide. He understood where their cynicism came from. Failed relationships and painful memories had shaped their worldviews. Still, he couldn't help but feel they were painting with too broad a brush. Then Oliver leaned forward, a mischievous glint in his eye. "All right, Mr. Idealist," he said, his tone shifting to one of challenge. "How about we make this interesting? A wager." Michael raised an eyebrow. "A wager?" Oliver nodded, his grin widening. "Find a woman who's beautiful, kind, and intelligent within 3 months. Someone who isn't interested in your money or status. If you can do it, I'll hand over the keys to my Mustang." The room seemed to grow quieter, the weight of the challenge hanging in the air. Michael's eyes widened in surprise. Seriously, why escalate things like this? Oliver leaned back, his expression smug. "Because I know how much you've always wanted that car. Let's see if you can prove us wrong." Michael had always admired Oliver's classic Mustang, a pristine vintage beauty that seemed almost too perfect for the real world. Its sleek lines, glossy finish, and rumbling engine had captivated Michael since the first time he saw it. He had even once offered Oliver a sum so generous it could have supported someone comfortably for years. Yet Oliver, who rarely even drove the car, had always refused to part with it. Now, with Oliver suddenly dangling the Mustang as the prize for a bet, Michael wasn't sure whether to believe him or chalk it up to the whiskey. Was this a genuine offer, or was Oliver simply trying to provoke him? "Are you for real with this bet?" Michael asked, his voice steady but skeptical as he searched Oliver's expression for any hint of a joke. "Dead serious," Oliver replied with a nod, his tone unwavering. Michael hesitated for a moment, weighing the challenge. Then, with a confident smirk, he replied, "All right then. I hope you're ready to let it go. And keep it polished for me. I like my Mustang shining." Oliver leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with mischief. "Once we shake on this, there's no backing out. You're aware of that, right?" Michael nodded, meeting Oliver's gaze. "I've never been one to back out of a challenge." But Oliver wasn't done. With a sly grin, he gestured for the waiter to bring another round of whiskey. "Let's make this more interesting," he said, leaning back in his chair as if savouring the moment. "Here's the deal. The woman you find must not only be beautiful, kind, and intelligent, but she also has to agree to marry you." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Marry me? That's a tall order for a 3-month time frame, don't you think?" Oliver shrugged, his grin unfaltering. "That's not all. You can't use your money to impress her. In fact, she has to believe you're broke, drowning in debt." Michael blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "So, you want me to find someone willing to fall in love with a man she thinks is penniless? You've certainly upped the stakes." Oliver smirked. "If it's as easy as you claim, this should be no problem for you, right?" Michael furrowed his brows, thinking over the conditions. The whiskey seemed to have fueled an especially creative challenge, but he couldn't back down now. Instead, his eyes sparkled with a hint of mischief, matching Oliver's energy. "You've got yourself a deal," he said, extending his hand. As their hands clasped, the wager was sealed. The Mustang, the bet, and the challenge ahead became the center of the evening's energy. Andrew, who had been silent during the negotiations, finally broke out in laughter. "This is going to be good! Mike, you might be the only guy crazy enough to pull this off." Michael grinned, already envisioning the road ahead. This wasn't just about proving Oliver wrong or winning the Mustang. It was about standing by his belief in genuine human connection, a value he held close to his heart. What Oliver and Andrew didn't know was the deeper reason Michael believed so strongly in love without pretense. It was the story of his parents, one he rarely shared but always carried with him. Not many in town knew the tale of how Michael's parents, Julia and Kurt, had met, a story of serendipity, resilience, and love found in the most unexpected circumstances. Julia, a diligent and practical woman, had spent most of her adult life working long shifts at a food processing plant. Her world was predictable and modest, with little room for surprises. Kurt, on the other hand, was a drifter, a man without a home, whose life was marked by uncertainty and hardship. One crisp autumn evening, Julia found herself waiting on a park bench beneath the glow of the clock tower. She had dressed carefully for a date, her blue dress complementing the auburn highlights in her hair. Her optimism began to fade as minutes turned into an hour. Her date wasn't coming, but she lingered, staring at the clock face as if willing it to rewind time. As she sat, a man shuffled into view. His scruffy appearance was hard to miss. Wild hair, an unkempt beard, and a tattered coat that had seen better days. He carried a battered briefcase, its polished handle incongruous with the rest of his appearance. Without hesitation, he sat down beside her. Julia stiffened slightly, uncertain of his intentions, until he turned to her with a boyish grin and asked, "Excuse me, do you have the time?" The question, so absurd with the enormous clock tower looming right above them, caught Julia off guard. She chuckled, her initial wariness giving way to amusement. "It's 8:15, she replied, her smile lingering as she glanced at the man beside her. Beneath the layers of dirt and dishevelled hair were the warmest brown eyes she'd ever seen. eyes that twinkled with mischief and an undeniable spark of kindness. "You've got a lovely laugh," the man said, his voice low but sincere. "Hope you don't mind me sitting here. You look like you could use some company." Julia was taken aback but intrigued. The man introduced himself as Kurt, and as their conversation unfolded, she learned more about him. The briefcase, he explained with a sheepish grin, held his most important possessions: a worn sleeping bag and a carefully curated collection of empty beer cans, each one with a story behind it. "You carry around empty cans?" Julia asked, arching an eyebrow, her amusement evident. Kurt shrugged. "They remind me of where I've been and how far I've yet to go," he said simply, his honesty disarming. As the night deepened, Julia's initial curiosity blossomed into genuine interest. She asked him why he had chosen to sit next to her, and his response made her heart skip a beat. "You looked so lovely, yet so alone," Kurt said, his gaze steady and sincere. "I thought maybe I could bring a smile to your face. And, well, I guess I wanted an excuse to talk to you." Julia laughed, a warmth spreading through her that she hadn't felt in a long time. Together they shared stories, laughter, and a connection that neither could have anticipated. Kurt had an uncanny ability to make her forget her disappointment, and Julia realized she was smiling far more than she had in weeks. By the time they parted ways, Julia couldn't stop thinking about the man with the twinkling eyes and the battered briefcase. Against all odds, that unlikely encounter marked the beginning of a love story that would withstand the tests of time. Kurt, with his unpolished charm and boundless optimism, reminded Julia that beauty often lies in the imperfections, and she, in turn, gave him the stability and love he had long yearned for. Together they built a life that defied expectations, one rooted in compassion, understanding, and the simple joys of being truly seen and loved. Kurt's descent into homelessness wasn't born from recklessness, but from a series of misfortunes that unraveled his life. Initially, his backpacking adventure was meant to be a journey of self-discovery, a break from the monotony of the 9-to-5 grind. But as luck turned against him, a cascade of setbacks left him penniless. One day of drinking to dull the sting of failure turned into many, and before he knew it, alcohol had become a way of life. Fate, however, had plans to redirect his path. The day Julia's date stood her up was the turning point. Julia, seated on that park bench with her dinner reservation for two, saw Kurt not as a vagabond, but as someone who, like her, had been dealt an unfair hand. She interpreted their meeting as a sign, an intersection of lives meant to happen. On an impulse, she extended her invitation to him. Dinner that evening was nothing short of magical. Despite their vastly different worlds, they connected on a level Julia hadn't anticipated. Kurt's humour, humility, and honesty captivated her, while Julia's warmth and genuine interest made Kurt feel seen for the first time in years. After dinner, as they walked toward Julia's residence, she felt an unexpected desire to embrace and maybe even kiss him. But as they drew closer, reality intruded. The sharp, unrelenting odour of Kurt's unwashed clothes reminded her of the distance between their circumstances. Kurt noticed her hesitation, a brief flicker of doubt in her eyes, and quickly assured her, "I'll meet you here tomorrow. Same spot. I promise." That night, Kurt was determined to be a man worthy of Julia's kindness. He sought out old friends, who gave him a place to shower and clean clothes that made him feel human again. The next morning, he returned to the park bench, his appearance transformed. In his hand, he clutched a modest bouquet of daisies, flowers he had picked himself, wanting to give Julia something as unpretentious and pure as her gesture the night before. Their love story blossomed from that moment on. Within 2 years, they welcomed their son, Michael. With Julia's unwavering belief in him, Kurt found his way out of the darkness. He put his talent for cooking, something he had always loved, toward rebuilding his life. 10 years later, he had not only overcome his struggles, but had become one of the most respected chefs at a prestigious restaurant in the state. Kurt's journey was a testament to redemption, while Julia's steadfast love proved that the truest connections transcend material concerns. For Michael, his parents' story was more than a romantic anecdote. It was a blueprint for what love should be. It showed him that authenticity, compassion, and mutual respect could weather any storm, and that love could exist without pretense or ulterior motives. That night, after his spirited debate with his friends, Michael returned home inspired. The memory of his parents' love fueled a determination within him to meet someone who would love him for who he truly was, not for his wealth or status. The next day he began strategizing, pen in hand, jotting down ideas. The most obvious route in the modern age was online dating, but Michael dismissed it almost immediately. To him, swiping left or right lacked the spark and depth of genuine face-to-face interactions. He wanted real connections, the kind where you could hear the warmth in someone's laughter or see the sincerity in their eyes. So he decided to take a more organic approach. He strolled through town, the vibrant storefronts illuminated by the late afternoon sun, each shopfront offering a glimpse of life's many stories. As he passed a yoga studio, a sign caught his attention: Yoga for Women. Michael chuckled to himself, imagining the absurdity of joining a yoga class just to meet someone. Maybe not the best strategy, he thought with a grin, moving along. Michael's stroll led him to a sign outside the town hall, its bold letters announcing an upcoming beauty pageant. The words gleamed under the afternoon sun, and for a moment he stopped to read the details. An idea clicked in his mind. The pageant, he thought, would not only be an entertaining event, but also a gathering of talented, confident, and beautiful women from both the town and its surrounding areas. While the event's main focus was undeniably on physical beauty, Michael reasoned that making it to such a competition likely required more than just good looks. It hinted at intelligence, determination, and a drive to stand out. As he pondered the possibilities, he thought with a smirk, not everyone wins the crown. Some of the participants not taking home a title might be open to new adventures, or even a chance encounter. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to meet someone unique, understand their aspirations, and perhaps strike up a genuine connection. Michael was all in on the challenge. To truly commit to the bet, he began taking drastic steps to alter his lifestyle and appearance. He swapped his upscale apartment for a modest mobile home parked at the edge of town. It was humble, even run down, with creaking floors and a draft that seemed impossible to keep out. To further sell the image of financial hardship, he bought a dilapidated Ford Taurus, a relic that defied logic by still running. Its rusted frame groaned every time he opened the door, and the engine sputtered as if constantly on the verge of giving up. Next, he turned his attention to his wardrobe. He visited the local thrift store, a labyrinth of mismatched garments and outdated styles, where every price tag seemed to mock his former habits of luxury spending. Rifling through racks of faded, oversized clothing, he picked out a frayed plaid shirt, an ill-fitting pair of jeans, and a well-worn jacket. By the time he left the store, he felt unrecognizable, a shadow of the polished man he had been just days before. The pageant day arrived sooner than he anticipated. That morning, Michael took a deep breath as he slid into the driver's seat of his Taurus, the vinyl upholstery cracked and peeling. He maneuvered the car into a spot outside the grand concert hall, its regal facade adorned with banners and lights. Even though he had purchased his ticket days earlier, while still dressed in his usual designer attire, a flicker of anxiety now crept in. How would he be perceived in his new persona? Climbing out of the Taurus, Michael adjusted his thrift store jacket and straightened his frayed shirt collar. The concert hall loomed above him, its towering doors welcoming attendees in elegant suits and shimmering gowns. Michael glanced at his reflection in the smudged window of his car, a man wearing clothes too big, standing beside a car too old. He allowed himself a small, self-deprecating grin. Here we go. The concert hall's entrance was unusually quiet as Michael walked in, the muffled sounds of applause and music from the auditorium confirming that the event had already begun. The lobby, bathed in dim light, was deserted except for a solitary figure. A janitor focused on mopping the floors with a slow, practiced rhythm. She was humming softly, her headphones faintly emitting a melody. Michael's ears perked up as he recognized the tune, a French song his mother used to love. Drawn by curiosity, he approached quietly, catching the lilting words of her hum. What truly caught his attention, though, wasn't just the tune but her impeccable French accent, fluid and authentic. "Excuse me," Michael said, his voice cutting through the stillness. The woman jumped slightly and spun around, startled, her violet eyes locking onto him. They were strikingly vivid, framed by thick lashes and filled with both surprise and curiosity. She removed her headphones and tilted her head, silently waiting for him to speak further. Michael faltered, momentarily at a loss for words. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Despite the simple janitor's uniform, her natural elegance shone through, her graceful posture, the sheen of her dark hair, and the delicate curve of her neck. A fleeting thought crossed his mind. She could easily be on that stage competing, not cleaning up after it. Regaining his composure, he offered a light-hearted smile and joked, "Missed the prelims, did we?" Her expression softened into a laugh, warm and genuine. "The pageant? No, it's not my scene," she said, her voice carrying a musical lilt that matched the French tune she'd been humming. "Really?" Michael teased, his smile widening. "I thought all girls dreamt of winning beauty pageants." She laughed again, shaking her head. "Not this one. Honestly, the only thing I'm dreaming about right now is finishing up here and catching the last bus home." Michael seized the opportunity, his tone casual yet earnest. "How about I give you a ride instead?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them, and he instantly wished he had driven something more impressive than his beat-up Taurus. She raised a skeptical eyebrow, her violet eyes assessing him. "Weren't you here for the pageant?" she asked, her voice laced with both curiosity and caution. Michael waved a hand dismissively, a broad grin on his face. "Somehow, I feel like I've already seen the most captivating participant." The unexpected compliment seemed to disarm her. A faint blush crept into her cheeks as her lips curved into a shy smile. She glanced down at her mop, then back at him, as if trying to gauge his sincerity. "I'll be waiting outside by the corner, whenever you're ready," he said, hoping she'd accept. Most women, understandably, would prioritize their safety when approached by a stranger. This girl, however, was no stranger to advances from men. She had dealt with her fair share of unwanted attention, and her sharp wit was usually enough to discourage most. So, when Michael made his offer, she responded with the same practiced finesse. "I'm not one for surprise adventures, but thanks for the offer," she said, her tone polite but firm, her violet eyes sparkling with a mix of amusement and dismissal. Michael was momentarily taken aback, but her clever response brought a smile to his face. Her refusal wasn't laced with hostility. It was playful, confident, and, if anything, intriguing. While a part of him respected her clear boundaries, another part of him couldn't help but be drawn to her. After all, his quest was about finding someone genuine, and this woman seemed to have more layers than her simple appearance let on. He took a few steps toward the exit, then paused, glancing back at her. "You know," he said, his voice casual but deliberate, "they say adventures are better when shared." She gave a soft laugh, shaking her head with a hint of exasperation before turning her attention back to her mop. "Maybe next time," she replied dismissively, her tone making it clear the conversation was over. Recognizing the signal, Michael didn't press further. He turned and walked out of the building, the sound of his footsteps fading into the stillness of the quiet hallway. As he reached the parking lot, he climbed into his rickety Ford Taurus, the worn driver's seat creaking beneath him. He turned the ignition key, and the car sputtered to life, its engine grumbling in protest. Yet, instead of driving off, Michael hesitated. His hands rested on the steering wheel, but his thoughts lingered on her. Something about her had captivated him, not just her beauty, but the way she carried herself. She hadn't looked past his thrift store attire or his unkempt appearance. She hadn't glanced at him with pity or judgment like so many others had since he'd started this charade. Instead, she had looked straight into his eyes as if trying to gauge the man behind them. "She never looked past my eyes," he murmured, the realization settling over him. Since he'd adopted his modest disguise, Michael had become acutely aware of how differently people treated him. Some avoided him entirely, others threw quick, assessing glances his way before moving on. It had been an eye-opening experience, revealing how swiftly people judged based on appearances. But she hadn't done any of that. She had seen him, not his clothes, not his car, not his carefully constructed persona. That thought stuck with him, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. Her name was Vicky. Roughly 20 minutes after Michael settled into his car, still debating whether to stay or drive away, she emerged from the concert hall. From his vantage point around the corner, Michael's heart began to race. Should he approach her? Or would staying make him seem like a stalker? He tapped the steering wheel nervously, glancing at her as she looked around briefly, then crossed the street and circled back. When Vicky finally noticed him sitting in his car, she strolled over with a playful smirk. "Did you expect me to circle the entire block to find you?" she teased. Michael, caught off guard but elated, quickly stepped out of the car and opened the passenger door for her. "Not at all. Just making sure you wouldn't change your mind," he said with a grin. As she settled into the passenger seat, she glanced around the car's well-worn interior, running her fingers lightly along the faded upholstery. A Ford Taurus, she mused, her tone carrying a mix of nostalgia and humor. "This takes me back. My grandma had one of these. So many memories of road trips, sitting in the back seat, eating snacks, and listening to her sing off-key." Michael chuckled, feeling an unexpected tinge of pride. "Yep, she's my trusty steed," he replied, giving the dashboard a light pat as he started the engine. As they drove, the air between them felt light, yet tinged with curiosity. After a moment, Vicky turned toward him. "So, what do you do?" she asked, her tone casual but inquisitive. Michael glanced at her, then gestured toward himself with a grin, hoping to convey his current persona. She tilted her head, puzzled. "I didn't quite catch that." No. Clearing his throat, Michael opted for a more straightforward approach. "I'm going through a rough patch right now," he admitted. "My attire and this car, well, they kind of reflect that." Vicky leaned back slightly, absorbing his words. A faint half smile crossed her lips. "Another guy who feels down on his luck," she mused silently, though the thought was fleeting. Almost immediately, she pushed past her initial assumption, offering him a reassuring look. "Life has its peaks and valleys. Your current situation, it's just a chapter. It doesn't define you. It's simply part of your journey." Her words caught Michael off guard. He had anticipated pity or perhaps a polite change of subject, but her insight was both refreshing and disarming. She didn't view him as just a man down on his luck, but as someone capable of rising above his challenges with the right mindset. "Thanks," Michael said quietly, glancing at her as they stopped at a red light. "Not everyone sees it that way." Vicky shrugged lightly. "It's just what I've learned," she replied. Her voice softened as her gaze turned toward the passing streetlights outside. "My grandma used to say, even the best stories have chapters that feel impossible to get through." She lived by that belief, and so do I. Michael could sense there was more to her perspective than mere optimism. It wasn't just empty encouragement. She spoke from experience. He didn't press, but her words stayed with him, echoing in the quiet hum of the car. Vicky had always believed that excessive sympathy did little to help people through their struggles. This conviction was deeply rooted in her own life experiences. Growing up, Vicky lived with her grandmother, Joyce, a fiercely resilient woman who became her rock after her parents' divorce. Joyce was full of life, teaching Vicky everything from baking pies to fixing leaky faucets. But their bond was tested when Joyce was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. The journey to Joyce's Alzheimer's diagnosis was fraught with misunderstandings and rising tensions, a path marked by confusion and heartache for the family. At first, the signs were subtle. Joyce would occasionally forget small details, like the name of their family dog or the dates of significant events. These lapses were easy to dismiss as harmless forgetfulness, quirks of age. But as time passed, her memory lapses grew more frequent and distressing. There were moments when she would go completely silent, visibly struggling to recall basic facts or piece together a coherent sentence. Objects around the house began to disappear, most notably Laurie's prized jewellery. When the missing items eventually turned up in unusual places, Laurie grew suspicious and frustrated. Laurie, Vicky's mother, had a strained relationship with Joyce, her mother-in-law. Not understanding the depth of Joyce's struggles, Laurie accused her of feigning forgetfulness and labelled her behaviour as deliberate. Tensions in the household escalated, with Laurie insisting that Joyce was intentionally causing disruption. Joyce was Vicky's paternal grandmother, and Vicky knew how deeply her father, Mark, cared for her. But Mark often found himself torn between his mother and his wife. Unable to reconcile the growing strain in their interactions, Laurie convinced Mark that Joyce needed to move out of their home. She framed it as a necessary decision for the family's peace and well-being, but in truth, it stemmed from frustration and misunderstanding. One afternoon, while Vicky was away at college, her phone rang. It was her father, his voice hesitant and strained. "Vicky," Mark began, his words heavy, "we've decided to move your grandmother into a care facility." Vicky froze, disbelief flooding her. "What?" she asked sharply. "You mean Mum's decided, right? This is her idea." Mark's silence on the other end was damning, confirming her suspicion. "She doesn't need a care facility, Dad," Vicky said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Grandma isn't being difficult. She's forgetting things. She needs medical attention, not isolation." Mark sighed heavily, his exhaustion evident. "It's not that simple, Vicky. She's been losing things, acting erratically. She's not the same anymore." "She's sick, Dad," Vicky pressed, her tone a mix of frustration and desperation. "That's why she's acting this way. Please, she needs us now more than ever." But Mark, caught between his wife's insistence and his own inability to handle Joyce's unpredictable behaviour, remained conflicted. Despite his daughter's pleas, he couldn't bring himself to stand against Laurie's decision. That night, Vicky sat in her dorm room, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. The thought of her grandmother being sent away to live among strangers, stripped of the familiar surroundings she clung to, filled her with anguish. Joyce didn't need abandonment, she needed compassion and understanding. By morning, Vicky had made a life-changing decision. She would leave college and return home to care for her grandmother herself. Vicky's bond with her grandma Joyce was unlike any other. Memories of their time together often transported her back to the warm summers spent at Joyce's charming lakeside cottage. The cottage, with its white picket fence and a garden blooming with flowers in every imaginable colour, was more than just a house. It was a sanctuary. When Vicky's parents separated during her childhood, the cottage became her refuge. Her parents, caught in the turmoil of their failing marriage, had sent her to stay with Joyce, to shield her from the worst of the conflict. What could have been a lonely and confusing time transformed into a chapter of unexpected joy and solace under Joyce's care. Mornings at the cottage were filled with the enticing aroma of Joyce's blueberry muffins, fresh from the oven. Vicky would wake to the comforting sounds of her grandmother bustling about the kitchen, humming softly to herself. After breakfast, they would walk down to the lake, the sunlight dancing on the water's surface. It was there by the lake that Joyce taught Vicky how to fish. With endless patience and gentle encouragement, she showed her how to cast a line and wait for the gentle tug that signalled a catch. Evenings with Grandma Joyce were magical for Vicky, and the storytelling sessions they shared became her most cherished memories. Under the soft glow of a lantern or the flicker of a fireplace, Joyce would weave tales that seamlessly blended wisdom with wonder. Some were drawn from age-old fables. Others were personal anecdotes from her youth. Each story carried a lesson, imparted with love and simplicity. One lesson in particular stayed with Vicky throughout her life. As they sat by the lake one evening, Joyce gestured toward the still waters, her voice calm and reflective. "Life is much like this lake," she said. "There are calm days and stormy nights, but even after the fiercest storm, tranquility always returns, just like in our lives." Joyce wasn't just a storyteller. She had been the glue holding their family together during turbulent times. When Vicky's parents separated, Joyce stepped in as a mediator. She convinced her son, Mark, to reunite with Laurie, emphasizing that Laurie needed his support. Her efforts bore fruit when Mark and Laurie reconciled and remarried. To accommodate their blended family, they sold Joyce's beloved cottage and bought a larger home. Though Vicky was heartbroken to lose her sanctuary, she trusted her grandmother's belief that sacrifices were sometimes necessary for the greater good. Fast forward to the present, 3 years had passed since Vicky made the heart-wrenching decision to leave college. Her life revolved around caring for Grandma Joyce, a full-time commitment that left little room for anything else. The two now lived in a modest apartment where Vicky juggled errands, doctor's appointments, and the daily routines of caregiving, always ensuring her grandmother was never alone for long. Caring for Joyce was both a labor of love and a test of resilience. The irony wasn't lost on Vicky. The very hands that had once nurtured her as a child were now the ones she tenderly cared for. There were moments of heartbreak, particularly on days when Joyce couldn't recognize her. The blank stare devoid of the warmth and familiarity Vicky had always known was a cruel reminder of Alzheimer's toll. But Vicky had grown strong, learning to manage her grandmother's occasional hallucinations, confusion, and disorientation. Fortunately, Joyce's diagnosis and subsequent treatments had brought some stability to her symptoms, though the challenges persisted. Vicky kept these struggles private, rarely speaking of them to anyone. Caring for Joyce was her responsibility, her choice, and she bore it with quiet strength. The night Michael drove her home, Vicky offered only a glimpse into her life. She mentioned her grandmother in passing, but divulged little else. Michael, captivated by her intelligence and quiet grace, was eager to know more. As they reached her apartment, he couldn't resist asking, "Can I see you again?" Vicky hesitated, her violet eyes searching his face. There was a vulnerability in her expression, as if she was weighing whether to let him into her world. After a brief pause, she nodded. "Maybe," she said, with a soft smile. That night, thoughts of Vicky consumed Michael. Her wit, her resilience, and the air of mystery surrounding her made her unlike anyone he'd ever met. Sleep eluded him as he replayed their conversation, imagining what lay behind the guarded exterior she presented. A few days later, Michael summoned his courage and called her. He invited her to a movie, and to his delight, she agreed. But just hours before the date, Vicky cancelled. She apologized, citing an unspecified obligation. Disappointed but understanding, Michael rescheduled, only for the same pattern to repeat. Each time she agreed, she later cancelled, deepening the enigma surrounding her. Determined not to give up, Michael decided to take a more direct approach. He planned a surprise visit, hoping to better understand the life she was so reluctant to share. Michael stopped by a small florist on the way to Vicky's apartment, selecting 2 bouquets. One was a vibrant mix of lilies and daisies for Vicky, and the other a delicate arrangement of soft pink carnations as a gesture for her grandmother. With the flowers in hand, he approached her modest apartment, his heart pounding slightly. When he knocked, Vicky's voice came faintly from inside, hesitant and apologetic. "It's not a good time, Michael." Sensing something was wrong, he pressed gently. Vicky, I just want to help. Please, let me in." There was a long pause during which Michael debated whether to stay or leave. Finally, the door opened and Vicky appeared, her expression a mix of surprise and something softer, gratitude perhaps. She glanced at the bouquets, her lips curving into a reluctant smile despite herself. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly, gesturing to the flowers. Michael shrugged, his usual easy grin returning. "I wanted to." Her eyes lingered on him for a moment, taking in the transformation. The man standing before her was vastly different from the scruffy stranger she'd met a few weeks ago, gone with a thrift store clothes and unkempt look. Now he stood clean-shaven, neatly dressed, and undeniably charming. Reluctantly, she stepped aside to let him in. Inside, Michael was immediately struck by the warmth of the apartment. The walls were adorned with framed family photos, and signs of Joyce's daily life were everywhere. A comfortable recliner near the window, a knitting basket filled with yarn, and medication bottles carefully organised on a side table. Vicky caught him glancing at the photos and offered him a drink. As they sat down, she began to share her story, her voice quiet but steady. Michael listened intently, his admiration for her growing with every word. She spoke of the challenges of caring for her grandmother, of giving up her education, and of the isolation that often came with her responsibilities. It was clear why she had cancelled their dates. Her world revolved around Joyce, and leaving her unattended for too long simply wasn't an option. To Michael, Vicky was nothing short of extraordinary. She had sacrificed so much, yet she carried herself with unwavering strength and grace. Over the following weeks, Michael found himself spending more and more time at her apartment. Their dates became evenings spent in her living room, sharing meals or watching TV while Joyce dozed peacefully in her chair. Michael began helping with Joyce's care, learning to prepare her medications, assisting her with small tasks, and even sitting with her during her lucid moments when she would share stories from her youth. The nights he used to spend with friends were now joyfully dedicated to Vicky and Joyce. One evening, while they were sitting at the kitchen table sorting through Joyce's bills, Vicky leaned over and kissed Michael lightly on the cheek. It was so sudden and unexpected that he nearly toppled out of his chair. Vicky laughed, a bright, genuine sound that Michael had grown to love. "Sorry," she said, a playful glint in her eyes. "You just looked so serious." Michael touched his cheek, grinning like a schoolboy. "Well, if that's the reward, I'll be serious more often." From that moment on, their bond only deepened. Every day, Michael found himself more captivated by Vicky, her resilience, her compassion, and the effortless way she carried the weight of her world. Girls like her, he thought, were a rare find. About a month later, Michael was lounging on Vicky's couch while she made a quick run to the drugstore. She had asked him to stay with her grandmother, who was resting in her recliner. With a slice of pizza in one hand and the TV remote in the other, Michael flicked through channels aimlessly when his phone buzzed with a call. Seeing Oliver's name, he answered on speakerphone, balancing his pizza precariously. "Hey, Ollie, what's up?" Oliver's familiar teasing voice came through. "Mike, what's up? Too busy chasing girls to hang out with us anymore?" Michael laughed, shaking his head. "Oh, you've no idea." "Speaking of which," Oliver continued, "should I be getting that Mustang ready?" Michael grinned, glancing over at Joyce, who was dozing peacefully. "You might want to. She's incredible, Ollie. I've never met anyone quite like her." Unbeknownst to Michael, the front door had quietly opened, and Vicky stood in the hallway, overhearing the conversation unfolding inside. She stayed frozen for a moment, her heart sinking as Oliver's voice filtered through the speakerphone. "So, has she said yes to the big question yet?" Oliver teased. Michael sighed, the weight of the situation audible in his voice. "We're not at that stage yet." Oliver's tone turned light but pointed. "If she hasn't agreed to marry you, then forget the Mustang. You know the bet's conditions." Michael hesitated, searching for the right words. It's not that straightforward, Ollie." By now, Vicky had pieced together enough to understand what was being discussed. Her breath caught in her throat as realization struck. This wasn't just a random call. It was about her, and it stung more deeply than she could have imagined. She stepped into the living room, her face betraying her feelings. Michael turned toward her, startled, and immediately hung up the call without even saying goodbye to Oliver. "Vicky, I didn't hear you come in," he began, his voice laced with panic. "Please, let me explain." She raised a trembling hand to stop him. "What year is the Mustang?" she asked, her voice shaking though her tone was measured. Her question hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He knew there was no easy way to fix this. "It's not what it looks like," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. Vicky's lip quivered and she crossed her arms tightly as if to shield herself. "So, after winning your bet, you'd just discard me?" Her voice cracked as she spoke, and her violet eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "No, Vicky. No," Michael said, his words tumbling out in desperation. "Honestly, that car means nothing to me. Yes, it started as a stupid, silly bet, but everything changed the moment I got to know you. You have to believe me." But Vicky wasn't in the mood to listen. The betrayal cut too deeply. She took a shaky breath, stepped to the door, and pulled it open, signaling for him to leave. "Michael," she said, her voice breaking, "just go." "Vicky, please, let me explain," he tried again, his hands raised in earnest. "I said leave," she said, tears now spilling freely down her cheeks. Her tone was firm but pained. "I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear from you. Just go." Reluctantly, Michael stepped outside. He turned back one last time, but Vicky shut the door behind him before he could say another word. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed in his ears, final and absolute. A few days later, Michael found himself back in his restaurant, trying to distract himself with work. After overseeing the daily operations, he sat in his office staring blankly at the papers in front of him. The weight of the past few days rested heavily on his shoulders. Lost in thought, he barely noticed when the door to his office burst open, his friends barging in, laughing loudly. Oliver and Andrew, oblivious to his mood, began teasing him. "Look at you," Andrew said with a grin. "Haven't seen you out in ages. What's the matter? Lost your mojo chasing that mystery girl?" "Or maybe she's too much for him," Oliver added, laughing. Michael's patience, already thin, finally snapped. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Why the hell did you call me that day, Oliver?" he shouted, his voice trembling with anger. "You ruined everything." The room went silent. Oliver, caught off guard, opened his mouth to respond, but stopped when he saw the raw emotion on Michael's face. The usual banter between them evaporated, replaced by a heavy tension. "I'm sorry, Mike," Oliver said quietly, genuine remorse softening his tone. I didn't think." "You didn't think at all," Michael shot back bitterly. "You've done more than enough already." Oliver lowered his gaze, his shoulders sagging. "If there's anything I can do—" "There isn't," Michael interrupted, his voice flat. "Just leave me alone." Despite his numerous attempts to reach out to Vicky, she refused to speak to him. She didn't answer his calls or reply to his texts. The silence between them stretched longer with each passing day, and eventually, Michael had to accept the possibility that she might never forgive him. One morning, as Michael sat in his restaurant, sipping coffee and trying to focus on the day's work, a commotion near the entrance caught his attention. Two teenagers were animatedly talking to one of the waiters holding a poster between them. Something about their urgent tone made Michael stand and walk over, curiosity pushing aside his weariness. When he got close enough to read the poster, his heart sank. It was a missing person poster for Joyce, Vicky's beloved grandmother. The grainy photo of Joyce, coupled with the details of her disappearance, sent a wave of anxiety through him. According to the poster, Joyce had been unaccounted for since the previous evening. Michael immediately envisioned what must have happened. Vicky had likely stepped out for groceries, assuming everything would be fine. But in her absence, Joyce, confused and disoriented, must have taken the car keys and driven off. Without hesitation, Michael sprang into action. He took a photo of the poster and sent it to all his contacts, explaining the situation and asking for their help in finding Joyce. His friends, sensing the urgency, rallied around him. Among them was Jacob, who owned a bloodhound named Scout, known for its exceptional tracking skills. For the next day, Michael and his friends scoured the area tirelessly. They checked local roads, gas stations, and even wooded trails, calling out Joyce's name and showing her picture to anyone they came across. It was Oliver, surprisingly, who made the breakthrough nearly 12 hours later. He called Michael, his voice uncharacteristically serious. "Mike, I think I found her car. It's abandoned near the edge of the woods, just off Old Creek Road." Michael wasted no time. He, Jacob, and the police rushed to the location Oliver had described. The sight of Joyce's car, its doors unlocked and headlights off, sent a shiver down Michael's spine. Jacob brought Scout forward, and the bloodhound eagerly sniffed the car's interior before bolting into the woods with a determined bark. The search that followed felt like an eternity. They navigated through dense undergrowth and uneven terrain, following Scout's lead. Finally, they found Joyce seated on an old moss-covered log, her frail frame trembling in the cold. Her eyes darted around, filled with confusion and fear as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. "Who are you? Where am I?" she asked, her voice trembling as she clutched her thin cardigan. Michael immediately stepped forward, his expression soft and reassuring. He removed his sweater and gently wrapped it around her shoulders. "It's okay, Joyce," he said softly. "You're safe now. We're going to take you home." Though her anxiety was palpable, Joyce allowed Michael and Jacob to help her stand. Michael tried calling Vicky, but the call went unanswered. Undeterred, he sent her a text. "We found your grandmother. She's safe. We're bringing her home." When they arrived at Vicky's apartment, the front door swung open before Michael could even knock. Vicky rushed out, tears streaming down her face as she ran to her grandmother. "Grandma!" she cried, wrapping Joyce in a tight embrace. "Oh, thank God, I was so worried." Joyce, though still disoriented, seemed comforted by Vicky's familiar presence. "I'm sorry, dear," she murmured, her voice fragile. I didn't mean to get lost." Vicky gently took her grandmother's hand, leading her inside with a mix of relief and exhaustion evident in her every step. Outside, Oliver lingered by the car, his head bowed. The weight of guilt rested heavily on his shoulders, not just for his role in discovering Joyce, but for the rift he had inadvertently caused between Michael and Vicky. He hesitated, his usual confidence replaced with uncertainty, before finally speaking. "So," Oliver said quietly, his voice uncharacteristically subdued, "are we good to go now?" Michael turned to him, his expression unreadable. After a moment's pause, he gave a slow nod. "Yeah," he said, his voice steady but restrained. "I guess." For several days, Michael waited, holding on to a fragile hope that Vicky might reach out. He wasn't expecting a grand gesture or for her to rush back into his arms. A simple acknowledgement, a text, a call, even a quick thank you would have meant everything. But the silence lingered, and Michael tried to accept that he might never hear from her again. A week later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Michael was lounging at home, sipping coffee and absent-mindedly flipping through the TV channels when his phone buzzed. It was Oliver, his tone unusually urgent. "Mike, you need to get to the restaurant. Now." Michael sat up, immediately alert. "Why? What's going on?" "Just get here," Oliver said, hanging up before Michael could press further. Puzzled and a little concerned, Michael quickly got dressed and headed to the restaurant. Normally it didn't open until 11 a.m. on Sundays, but as he approached, he could see movement inside. Shadows of people flitted past the windows, and the faint hum of chatter reached him. When he opened the door, a chorus of joyful shouts erupted. "Happy birthday!" Michael froze, dumbstruck, as colourful confetti rained down around him. His friends were gathered in the dining area, beaming at him with wide grins. Balloons and streamers adorned the walls, and a large cake sat on one of the tables, its candles unlit. Michael blinked, realization dawning slowly. He had completely forgotten his own birthday amidst the chaos of the past few weeks. "Surprise!" Oliver called, emerging from the crowd with a wide grin. "You didn't think we'd let this day slide, did you?" Michael laughed, shaking his head as he stepped further inside. "I can't believe I forgot. You guys really didn't have to do this." "Of course we did," Andrew chimed in, clapping him on the back. "You've been too serious lately. Time to celebrate." As the group mingled and joked, a deep, throaty roar suddenly interrupted the chatter. Heads turned toward the front of the restaurant, where a gleaming red Mustang slowly pulled up, its engine purring like a contented cat before it went silent. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped Oliver, grinning ear to ear. He tossed a set of keys toward Michael, who instinctively caught them, staring in disbelief. "You've earned it," Oliver said, spreading his arms theatrically. "The Mustang's all yours." Michael's jaw dropped. He turned from the keys in his hand to the car parked outside, its polished surface gleaming in the sunlight. Memories of the bet rushed back, flooding him with mixed emotions. Before he could say anything, a voice cut through the din. "I figured you wanted this car more than you wanted me." Michael spun around to see Vicky standing near the doorway, her arms crossed and a playful smirk tugging at her lips. The sight of her left him momentarily speechless. The room erupted in laughter, the light-hearted joke easing the tension. Vicky's smirk softened into a smile as she walked closer. "Relax," she said, her tone gentler now. "I'm kidding." On the day Joyce was found, Oliver took it upon himself to reach out to Vicky. He knew how much Michael had been hurting and felt a responsibility, as his best friend, to clear the air. When Vicky answered the phone, her voice was wary but calm. "Oliver," she said, "what do you want?" Oliver hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to begin. Finally, he said, "Vicky, I know you have every reason to be upset with Michael right now, but there's more to the story than you might realize." Vicky's tone was guarded. "All right, Oliver, I'm listening." Taking a deep breath, Oliver began. "That whole bet thing, it wasn't about playing with your feelings. Michael, he'd been in a rough place for a while. He was drowning in work, barely taking time for himself. He'd shut out a lot of the world, including us. As his friends, we were worried about him. The bet was just our way of giving him a push to get out there, to maybe meet someone special and experience life beyond work." Vicky, though still hurt, found herself intrigued. "So you made a bet for him to find love?" she asked, her voice skeptical but not dismissive. Oliver chuckled awkwardly. "When you put it like that, it does sound ridiculous. But the Mustang wasn't about winning your heart. It was just a motivator, something to get him moving. Trust me, by the time he met you, the car was the last thing on his mind. He genuinely fell for you, Vicky. I've never seen him like this with anyone." There was a pause, and then Vicky asked softly, "But why the Mustang? Why not just give him a pep talk or, I don't know, something less juvenile?" Oliver sighed. "The Mustang was symbolic, I guess. Michael's done so much for me and my family over the years, things I'll never be able to repay. That car was my way of thanking him. I'd planned to give it to him for his birthday long before the bet even came up. It just became a convenient part of the whole silly challenge." Vicky felt a flood of emotions, anger, sadness, and a hint of understanding. She took a deep breath, processing Oliver's words. "Thank you for being honest, Oliver," she said at last. Her voice was softer now, less guarded. "Vicky," Oliver said earnestly, "all I want is for Michael to be happy, and I genuinely believe that's with you." When Vicky appeared at Michael's surprise party, her playful smirk was the first thing that caught his attention, but it was the warmth in her eyes that stayed with him. The roaring engine of the Mustang, the teasing jokes, the laughter in the room, everything faded as his eyes met hers. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, an unspoken understanding beginning to form. Vicky broke the silence, her voice light but tinged with emotion. "But I do hope you wanted me a little more than the Mustang," she said softly, stepping closer. Michael, his heart racing, set the keys down on a nearby table and closed the distance between them. "The Mustang doesn't matter," he said, his voice low and steady. "You're all that matters, Vicky." With that, he pulled her into a tight embrace, holding her as if to make up for all the hurt and distance between them. A year of healing and rebuilding passed since that transformative moment. Michael and Vicky, with hearts freshly mended and a deeper understanding of each other, began to weave a life of love and care around Grandma Joyce. They dedicated themselves to ensuring her days were filled with joy and serenity. Though caring for her came with challenges, especially as Joyce's condition worsened, those moments were interspersed with laughter, shared stories, and small but precious victories that stitched their family closer together. Eventually, Michael and Vicky decided to solidify their love with a promise of forever. On a sunny spring afternoon, they stood under a delicate archway of blossoming vines in a small, intimate ceremony. Joyce, seated in the front row as the guest of honor, smiled brightly, her hands resting gently on a bouquet of wildflowers. When Michael and Vicky exchanged vows, it wasn't just a union of two hearts. It was the blending of a family that had weathered life's storms together. Their journey wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and it was built on the unshakable foundation of love, resilience, and mutual respect. For several blissful years, Michael and Vicky's love story unfolded seamlessly. Their days were filled with warmth and togetherness, though often interspersed with the sobering realities of Grandma Joyce's aging and the progress of her disease. Yet, they faced each day with gratitude and determination, focusing on creating beautiful memories for her remaining time. They celebrated the small joys, the rare moments of clarity when Joyce would recall a cherished story from her past, or her infectious laughter as Michael tried, and often failed, to learn the card games she used to play so expertly. They cherished every second, knowing how fleeting those moments could be. When the inevitable day came, Joyce passed away peacefully in her sleep. Michael and Vicky mourned deeply, their grief heavy, yet laced with gratitude for the life Joyce had lived and the love she had given them. At her memorial, they honored her not with tears alone, but with stories and laughter, celebrating the remarkable woman who had been their anchor. A month later, in the midst of their grief, life offered a new spark of joy. One quiet evening, as they sat together reflecting on Joyce's memory, Vicky placed Michael's hand gently on her swelling belly. Her voice was soft but filled with emotion as she whispered, "We're going to be parents." Michael's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and overwhelming happiness flooding his face. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice trembling with excitement. Vicky nodded, her smile radiant. "Yes." 9 months later, with tears of joy gleaming in their eyes, they welcomed a tiny life into their world. A beautiful baby girl. Without hesitation, they named her Joyce, a living tribute to the woman who had shaped their lives in countless ways. Little Joyce grew up surrounded by love, immersed in the stories and legacy of her great-grandmother. Michael and Vicky made sure she knew about the strength and resilience of the woman she was named after. They often recounted tales of summer fishing trips, warm blueberry muffins, and the wisdom that had been passed down through generations. Through life's inevitable ebbs and flows, Michael and Vicky's bond remained steadfast. They nurtured not only their love for each other, but also the values that Grandma Joyce had instilled in them: resilience, compassion, and the importance of family. Their home became a haven of warmth and love, a place where Grandma Joyce's spirit lived on in every laugh, every story, and every memory they created together. Her legacy cascaded through the generations, a gentle reminder of the enduring power of love and family.